It is our great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this talk on Geopolitics and Study of Indian Civilization by Sri Rajiv Malhotra. Further, this event is graced by the presence of two dignitaries, Dr. Subhash Chandra and Professor Ram Subramanian. Our chief guest for today is Dr. Subhash Chandra, who is the chairman and founder of SL Group and Z Media. I would now invite Dr. Subhash Chandra on stage and request Professor Ganesh to felicitate him. Thank you, sir. Now, I would take this opportunity to welcome our keynote speaker, Sri Rajiv Malhotra, who has authored several national bestsellers like Breaking India, Being Different, and Indira's Net. I invite you, sir, on stage, and I request Professor Ganesh to welcome Dr. Rajiv Malhotra and felicitate him. We are very delighted to have with us Professor K. Ram Subramanian, who is a renowned Sanskrit scholar and a faculty member at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Bombay. I request Professor Ganesh to felicitate Professor K. Ram Subramanian and welcome him on stage. Thank you, Professor Baba.
We have our very own Professor K. Rama Subramanian, a faculty member at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Bombay. His research areas include Indian science and technology, Indian philosophy, nonlinear dynamics, and chaos. He's a traditionally trained Sanskrit scholar and also holds a doctorate in theoretical physics. His investigations of classical Indian texts have shed a lot of light on the development of Indian mathematics and astronomy of the medieval period, especially the work of Kerala school during the 15th and 16th centuries. Professor Rama Subramanian is one of the authors who prepared the explanatory notes of the celebrated work, Ganita Yukti Bhasha of Jeshtadeva, which brings out the seminal contributions of the Kerala school of astronomers and mathematicians in the field of mathematical analysis. The book was published by Hindustan Book Agency, New Delhi, in 2 volumes and was reprinted by Springer. Besides this, Professor Rama Subramanian has edited the work of 500 years of Tantra Sangraha, published by the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla. He has also completed a rigorous course on Advaita Vedanta, which fetched him the coveted title of Vidvat Pravara from the Jagadguru Shankaracharya of Sri Sringeri Sharata Peetham. He is also quite popular among faculty and student circles of the IIT Bombay for his regular classes on Vedanta. He's also a recipient of the Maharshi Badarayana Vyasamman for the year 2008, awarded by the President of India himself. He currently holds the council membership of Indian National Science Academy and also is a member of the Europe-based International Union of History and Philosophy of Science. With this, I humbly request Professor K. Rama Subramanian to deliver his introductory note.
Namaskar. We are indeed really honored to have 2 eminent personalities here to talk to us a little later, Sri Rajiv Malhotra ji and Dr. Subhash Chandra. I am also extremely delighted to see a large gathering here to listen to these talks. Instead of trying to talk about the text, the battle for Sanskrit, which has been recently launched, I will try to narrate to you a couple of instances which I felt was extremely relevant in this context of authoring this book on the battle for Sanskrit. As it was introduced, I have been working on the area of history of Indian science and technology. I was just sharing with Dr. Malhotra, Rajiv Malhotra ji, a little while ago, the kind of problems that I encountered as a researcher entering into this field. So the battle which he is trying to refer to will become all the more evident to you when I narrate this couple of instances. In the early 90s, after my MSc, when I entered into the domain of this history of Indian science and technology, as I was really drawn into, we discovered an interesting fact about the planetary model which has been discussed in a 15th, 16th century work. As we discovered this model, so we were quite excited, myself and a couple of people. We immediately wanted to make a publication of this result. And once we authored a paper, we also decided that it has to be published in one of the Indian journals. When we sent it to this journal, this was immediately sent for referring to someone who is in Brown University, who is a well-acknowledged figure in the history of astronomy. And then there was a response saying that what these authors have described is completely wrong. We had to write a rebut. And then we offered our explanations. Once again, it came back after 3 months or 4 months saying, more or less iterating what the points had been stated in the earlier referee report. So the editor now decides that this should not be published in this journal. So this was a battle which we had to wage in the early 90s, 92. The only option that we had was to either say that, okay, is journal ko chhod do, aur kahin jao. The other option is to just to see to it that we make it happen. And it was decided by 3 of us that we will send it to all the editorial members in the editorial board. There were a few sane people who were quite influential too, and they had to write very strongly saying that you need not necessarily depend upon the interpretation of someone else for describing a Sanskrit verse which is described in clear terms in this. And finally, the editor agreed, but he had a note at the top of the paper that though a referee was not agreeing with the interpretations of the authors, we have finally decided to publish it. So this was the note, and then the paper commences. This was the first battle. Let me tell you that there are several kinds of things which we are facing with respect to interpretation of our own texts. I'm not trying to say that every Western scholar is trying to demean, but we need to understand that there are problems for them to interpret it appropriately. This is what I think Sri Rajiv Malhotra is trying to bring out in this particular volume, that we have to start studying our own things. We need not necessarily depend upon their interpretation, and rather we should not completely depend on the interpretations which are being offered by them. The other instance which I would like to share with you is a very interesting thing which I share with the students also when I offer this course on development of mathematics in India. Just now it was referred during the remarks that we had a very rich mathematical tradition here, and this mathematical tradition, in fact, reached its zenith around 14th, 15th century in India, wherein our mathematicians were able to bring out even the infinite series which are generally ascribed to Leibniz and Newton and so Gregory and so on. I'm saying this because I came across a very interesting dialogue which happened between some of these British officers. There was a person called Charles Wish, who was stationed in Kerala, and through his interactions and his own deep interest in trying to understand what the culture here was, he picked up both Sanskrit as well as Malayalam language, and he found some interesting things which have been done by Indian mathematicians which are very different from the way it is being done in Europe in 18th century, 19th century. After his study for about 10 years or so, Charles Wish writes an article on some of these discoveries which have been made by Kerala mathematicians. And when he sends it to the literary society, so he has to send it to the Royal Society there, and soon after it was sent, there is a reply which comes from one of the senior officers there. I want to just quote that to you. Before that, the only thing that I want to tell you is, so this series is something which has been presented in Sanskrit, and there are several versions of this infinite series which are fast convergent series, basically the pi series for mathematics, pi by 4 series. The reply that he got was, you better investigate whether this is genuinely found by these people or simply copied from the European texts. He once again writes back to them saying that I am quite convinced that this is genuinely found by Indian mathematicians because the approach is completely different, and these people who are giving this series have absolutely no exposure whatsoever to European mathematics. In spite of this goes from Wish to Heine, and Heine actually writes to a much more senior officer who is called John Warren, and John Warren in his Kala Sankalita reports all this. I quote what is written by Heine. The Hindus never invented the series. It was communicated with many others by Europeans to some learned natives in modern times. Mr. Wish sent a list of various methods of demonstrating the ratio of the diameter and circumference of a circle employed by the Hindus to the literary society, being impressed with the notion that they were the inventors. I requested him to make further inquiries, and his reply was that he had reasons to believe them entirely modern and derived from Europeans, which is a false interpretation. Observing this, not one of those used the rules could demonstrate them. The last sentence is really appalling. He says, indeed, the pretensions of the Hindus to such a knowledge of geometry is too ridiculous to deserve refutation. So this is the note which Heine presents to John Warren. And John Warren was really confused, and he presents that this may be, this may not be, and so on and so forth. The reason for quoting this is the following. When various texts are being interpreted by these scholars, I am not trying to tell you that all of them have bad intentions or trying to suppress that. There are instances where ignorance could be the cause in trying to project it something wrongly. But there are instances like this where it is pretty well known that it is done there. In spite of it, they have reservations in trying to accept this as the contributions of Indians. So it is in this connection, I think this book is all the more relevant, where he is trying to point out, Rajivji is trying to point out how certain things are misinterpreted. I will give you one more instance. So there are glowing tributes which have been made by some Western scholars too. So let me just share, this too with you. But there are quite a few instances in which one finds that Sometimes there is resistance in accepting. Sometimes there is suppression in trying to present the facts which are so well established. With one instance, let me just conclude my talk. Recently, someone came to IIT Bombay. He is from UK, so he wanted to interview a couple of us here in trying to extract some facts related to Indian mathematics. After the interview was over, I am not detailing the interview, he presented a book of his own, which is primarily meant for general audience to come to know about the history, understand the history. Presented very interestingly, he is a good scholar, no doubt. But then there is a chapter on it called Life of Pi. In this Life of Pi, when I browsed through that, I was appalled to see that there is no mention of this particular series which has been authored by Madhava in 14th century. This is a text which is being published in 2010, mind you. There are dozens and dozens of papers, and the first publication was in 1835. Almost for about, so in fact, I must tell you that Wish had to struggle for 10 years to get it published. I think it was more or less posthumously published. So this article. So this battle has been going on for quite some time. So this man, strangely, I'm quite surprised that he simply jumps from 3rd, 4th century BCE to 18th, 19th century. It is not that he doesn't know of this series which has been invented by Kerala mathematicians, which have been so well established. So this is something, so sometimes it is being suppressed, sometimes it is being misinterpreted, and it is primarily this aspect I think he is trying to bring out in this particular volume, so which is really worthwhile to read, and I was really fascinated when I read this volume. One thing which I felt, which I would share, and then I will conclude my talk, my note here, is there are several scholars who study about Indian civilization. They keep writing articles, they focus on a particular aspect of Indian civilization, they keep authoring books and so on. Not many scholars are there who have a much broader perspective of various aspects of Indian civilization. And even if they have a broader perspective, they don't try to extend their radar to see to it what is happening elsewhere all around the globe. Even if someone has, it takes a lot of courage for a person to study them, to analyze them, and to counter what is being presented elsewhere. And I think here, Rajiv Malhotra ji is a very, very rare individual who has been trying to engage himself not only with the study, but to wage a war against what has been waged. So this is something which is very unique to him, and I have great regards for him in this regard, offering my venerations to the kind of commitment that you have been exhibiting in trying to do this. I would like to conclude my speech here as introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramakrishnan, for this insightful discourse on the battle for Sanskrit. Now, I would take this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, Sri Rajiv Malhotra. He is an Indian-American researcher, writer, speaker, and public intellectual on current affairs as they relate to civilizations, cross-culture encounters, religion, and science. He holds the position of Chairman, Board of Governors, Center for Indic Studies at University of Massachusetts. He studied physics at St. Stephen's College in Delhi and has a postgraduate degree in computer science from the Syracuse University. Shri Rajiv Malhotra had an illustrious corporate career where he played multiple roles, including software development, corporate consulting, and a senior executive in a Fortune 100 company. He is also a successful entrepreneur. At the peak of his career, when he owned 20 companies in several countries, he took an early retirement at the age of 44 to pursue philanthropy, research, and public service. He established the Infinity Foundation for this purpose in 1994. Shri Rajiv Malhotra has conducted original research in a variety of fields and has influenced many other thinkers in India and the West. He has disrupted the mainstream thought process among academic and non-academic individuals alike by providing fresh, provocative positions on Dharma and on India. Some of the focal points of his work are interpretation of Dharma for the current times, comparative religion, globalization, and India's contribution to the world. Currently, Shri Rajiv Malhotra is a full-time founder director of the Infinity Foundation in Princeton, New Jersey. The foundation has given more than 400 grants for research, education, and community work. It has provided strategic grants to major universities in support of pioneering programs, including visiting professorships in Indian studies at Harvard University, yoga and Hindi classes at Rutgers University, researchers and teachings of non-dualistic philosophy at University of Hawaii, Global Renaissance Institute and a Center for Buddhist Studies at Columbia University, a program in religion and science at University of California, endowment for the Center for Advanced Study in India at University of Pennsylvania, lectures at the Center for Consciousness Studies at University of Arizona. He has authored hundreds of articles, provided strategic guidance to numerous organizations, and has over 300 video lectures available online. To best understand Rajiv Ji's thoughts and contributions, his books are a great resource. Besides Invading the Sacred, he has authored several game-changing books such as Being Different, Breaking India, and Indra's Net. His upcoming book, Battle for Sanskrit, offers its readers a spirited debate, marshalling new insights and research. It is a valuable addition to an important subject and in the larger context on the academic field called Indology and Sanskrit studies. Thank you.
To launch the book, we have amongst us our chief guest, Dr. Subhash Chandra, an Indian media samrat, businessman, television personality, motivational speaker, and philanthropist. He is a chairman of SL Group, an Indian conglomerate which owns India's largest television channel network, Zee Media. Dr. Subhash Chandra is a self-made personality and is among the leading lights of Indian industry. He has consistently demonstrated his ability to identify new businesses and lead them on the path to success. Today, SL Group, under his leadership, is a leading business conglomerate having diverse business presence across media, entertainment, packaging, infrastructure, education, precious metals, and technology sectors. The group owns more than 20 companies, the most noteworthy being the portfolio of numerous entertainment and news channels reaching millions of viewers in India and internationally. Zee is considered as one of the strongest Indian media brands across the world. SL's print venture, DNA, an English daily, provides responsible journalism to its readers. Dr. Subhash Chandra, a philanthropist himself, has led the group create a social impact through several socially relevant activities. He is the chairman of Ekal Vidyalaya, the largest non-government education movement operating in remote and tribal villages of India. He is also the senior trustee of the Global Vipassana Foundation, and his autobiography, The Z Factor, was recently released by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi. I now invite Dr. Subhash Chandra to launch the book, The Battle for Sanskrit, in the presence of this august audience.
Thank you, sir. I would now request Shri Rajiv Malhotra to enlighten us with his keynote address on the topic Geopolitics and Study of Indian Civilization.
Namaskar. It is a great honor to have Subhash ji and Ram Subramaniam ji grace this occasion in an amazing auditorium, IIT Bombay. I've spoken in this campus before and had some very exciting conversations. I would like to give some comments and then have lots of time for Q&A because I think it makes it more lively and more exciting. And I look forward to Subhash ji's comments also. We are in one of the technology centers of the country, a prominent IIT, and India is an international hub of IT. India is also a global hub for some other industries like pharmaceutical research, like automobiles, and so on, diamonds, various industries. And our government has a policy of Make in India. So I'm going to provoke you. Why can't we make in India the world's finest and most important Indology? Why is it that we are dependent on Videshi Indology, as Ramji mentioned? He gave some perfect examples. We depend on outsiders to certify the quality of our understanding about our own civilization, about our own history, about our own philosophy. The best journals in Sanskrit studies, according to many Indian traditional scholars, are in the West, and they try to get their papers published there. Certainly the most prestigious places, Indian traditional scholars tell me, the most prestigious places to get their PhD in Sanskrit or India studies are places like Harvard, Columbia, Chicago, Oxford. The most important conferences a scholar must go and present his papers are overseas. So obviously, since the editorial boards consist of other people and the committees for dissertations consist of other people, and the gatekeepers of these festivals and conferences are controlled from elsewhere, that means that our people have to either live as a second-class citizen in that discipline, or they have to sell out their ideology and conform to what the West expects of them. This, I think, is something very important that we should confront. At one time, we used to have Nalanda and Takshashila and places like that, where we exported knowledge to the world. We were the Ivy Leagues of that time. People from all over would come, send their brightest students to learn all sorts of things. What is now called liberal arts is not something invented in the West. The same kind of stuff used to be learned, researched and taught in our universities. So instead of being knowledge exporters, the way we were once, we've become knowledge importers. And in the study of our own civilization, instead of being the producers of knowledge, we've become the consumers. We've been trained to learn what others have written about us. Now, this is very peculiar because it's not the case in China. China studies is controlled by the Chinese, mostly in Mandarin. Japan studies is controlled by Japanese people, government and industry. Arabic studies is controlled by the Arabs. Persian studies is controlled by Iran. Russian studies is controlled by Russia, and so on. We are probably the only major civilization whose intellectual discourse is controlled from the outside. Not imposed on us, but with our gratitude. We are very grateful that they are studying us. We are so grateful that they have found us interesting enough to study. It's a very interesting Once I was criticizing Western Indologists that they have taken our adhikar from the traditional adhikaris. And he said very clearly in a big audience, he said, you should be actually very grateful that we are giving importance and prominence to your civilization. So I said, it's like King George V. Once he was asked, according to one report, why he's wearing the Kohinoor, why he's taken the Kohinoor diamond. And he's reported to have said that the people of India should be proud that the emperor of their emperor has chosen their diamond to put on his crown. That's the arrogance. And the fact that we accept it is shameful. Now, the question is, who has adhikar to describe what constitutes scholarship? Who has adhikar to describe who can speak for the Vedic traditions, who can speak for Sanskrit and Sanskriti and Hinduism? Who has the adhikar? Who decides? According to the Western criteria of scholarship, Sri Ramakrishna would not be considered a scholar because he did not have a Western certified degree, nor did Vivekanand, nor did Paramahansa Yoganand, nor did Sri Aurobindo, and so on. So if you look at the definition of what constitutes authority, you see, according to us, a rishi doesn't have to have formal certification, but has a higher state of consciousness, and that is his adhikar to speak from there. A yogi does not even know how to read and write. Could be the greatest yogi without having read a text on yoga. That's true. We don't have a written tradition of memorizing, learning from written. It's oral. So the idea of authority is quite a different authority. Of course, we have shastris. That's one kind of authority who knows a lot of texts. But that's not the only authority. We have bhakti poets that are authorities without being sort of text-oriented, learning old text-oriented. So the idea of authority is quite different. The idea of adhikar conceptually is quite different. Now, I say this with respect to Western tradition that has produced a lot of good work. It's just that it has gone too far in imposing one view of what constitutes adhikar. Now, the knowledge industry, I used to, in my previous career, I used to be, one of the things I did is industry analysis. So when I started this field of looking at in India and its portrayal and misportrayal, one of the first things I did was to do an industry analysis of India studies. I made a database of everybody who studies Indian history, Indian politics, Indian religion, Vedas, Sanskrit, philosophy, anthropology, whatever, political science, social sciences, the humanities and social sciences. I made a database, and actually it's a few thousand people. So it's a huge industry outside India of people who studied Indian civilization. Same is true of Chinese, Japanese, all kinds of civilizations. These are huge fields. Then I started looking at who funds them. Why do they fund them? Who produces the knowledge? Is that knowledge consistent with what we think, or is it in conflict? And what is the output? Who benefits? What is the consequences? So I produced several reports 10, 12 years ago on the state of India studies as an industry. And it's quite sad, our own people didn't take any of this seriously. So the problem is not others are studying us their own way. They should, they have every right to. The problem is that we have not engaged them. So we have not defied them the way Ram said he's defied them. And I'm very happy he defied them. We need more people who stand up and say, I'm going to do it my way, and I have logic, I have proof, I'm not radical or anything like that. I don't have to be apologetic, and these are my findings. We need more such courageous people to stand up and assert. Now, if we can have Make in India policy for all these other things that I mentioned, then what I will discuss later, what would it take to have Make in India for our own Indology? And I call it Swadeshi Indology. So I draw the difference between Videshi Indology and Swadeshi Indology. And in my book, The Battle for Sanskrit, basically this is a a book that explains what are the differences between the insider view and the outsider view. The insider is the Swadeshi. The insiders are people who have Shraddha for the language and for the Sanskriti, who have sadhana, who are very much invested in this, who consider it their own heritage, and who sort of feel this is their identity, this is their sense of values. And the outsiders are people who look at it as a language of those people, them. Now, both have a right. I do not believe in banning books. I do not believe in suppression. I do not believe in any disrespect. I have a lot of regard and respect for the people I criticize because I don't criticize them individually or as a person, and I only critique their work. And I do it with the openness to have a nice, friendly dialogue, which is what I invite them to do, which is what this book is also inviting them to do. So there's no anger or emotions involved. It's just a very dispassionate, it's a very sort of cool-headed, level-headed analysis of what is being said by the outsiders and how these are red flags that the insiders would not agree with. So this debate between insiders and outsiders, those who are from the Vedic tradition or the Buddhist tradition or the Jain tradition versus the outsiders who are looking at these traditions, that's the subject of my book. Now we have a tradition called Purva Paksh, which is a very old tradition. Purva Paksh is a tradition where a school of thought in India would critique and evaluate a different school of thought. It would debate. So for instance, Hindus, Buddhists would debate each other. Hindus would go to Buddhists with an argument very respectfully, and the other side would respond. And similarly, they would do an analysis of our side, and we would respond. Now, as long as we were doing Purva Paksha in a mutually respectful manner and Uttar Paksha, we had a tremendously vibrant intellectual life in this country. But somehow, for reasons not very clear, and I try to analyze them in my book, for reasons not very clear, we stopped doing the Purva Paksha. We stopped, when the early Christians came, who became known as Syrian Christians, there was no Purva Paksha. There was no analysis of their Christianity by our Brahmins. We just ignored them. Later, when the Muslims came, there was no Purva Paksha of Islam. When the Portuguese came, and very heavy-handed way, we did not try to analyze their, the church, who sent them, what's their power structure, to try and understand who they are. When the British came, same way, we kind of ignored them. We fought them in other ways, but we did not go and understand them intellectually, culturally, their history. There's no Sanskrit work on modern European thought. There's on the Enlightenment movement, on Marxism, on postmodernism, and so on. So a lot of our experts became introverted. We blame them, others, but we really should blame ourselves because we became introverted. We were not interested in engaging them for whatever reason. And so, it became a proud thing to say, I know the truth in my heart, why should I worry about others? But that's not the spirit of Purva Paksha. We are supposed to understand others, we're supposed to engage them and debate them from our point of view. And this is how our tradition was kept vibrant for so long. So the reason for the decline, one of the major reasons for the decline of our civilization is what I call the death of Purva Paksha, the death of this tradition of looking at others. Even now, when you look at the teachings, it's almost like either ignoring the others or a very bombastic dismissal, very angry dismissal that they're useless, they don't know. That's not Purva Paksha. You're supposed to take them seriously, and you're supposed to give a serious intellectual response. You cannot trivialize your opponents. You don't win a debate by trivializing your opponents. So I feel that one of the major goals I have in writing this book is to wake up our traditional scholars and get them out of their silos and get them to respond. I'm very happy to say that I gave a few lectures in recent days in Karnataka and Chennai, and at the prominent Sanskrit universities in those places. And I kind of held them responsible, saying, why have you guys not done Purva Paksha? I thought they'll be defensive, but they were not. They really respected what I'm doing. I thought some of them will say, who are you to do all this? We are the ones with the adhikar. Why are you doing all this? But actually, they sat, hundreds of them sitting, listening. The vice chancellor in one case, the head of the university, prominent top thinkers, top Sanskrit scholars, and I have videos that some of them are up and more will be up. Prominent Sanskrit scholars, traditional ones, very well-known figures, stood up and said, we need to do Purv Paksha. We haven't done Purv Paksha enough. Once I asked an audience with 200 people, how many of you have done Purv Paksha? And reluctantly, 2 people put their hands up. So this is the point. And then in all these instances, they offered me afterwards that they want to work with me to develop a home team of intellectual Kshatriyas who can give a response. And what they said is, you should tell us what the Western Indologist is saying, and we will give the response. In other words, I'll help them with the Purv Paksha. I will help them with the Purv Paksha of what the Western Indology is saying, and then the traditional scholars will develop the response, the Uttar Paksha. This is a very good team, because I cannot do what they can do, and they have not done what I am doing, for whatever reason. Maybe they're afraid. Some of them are afraid. Some of them don't know English. Some of them know English, but they don't know the Western idiom. They don't know the very sophisticated jargon, the terminology, which is used in Western Indology. It is based on Western Siddhanta or Western thought. And some of them are sold out. This is also true. The Indology empire, if you will, has taken some of the smart traditional scholars, put them on the payroll, and they're working for them. And this is well known. In Delhi University, I'm told there's 5 or 6. In Mysore, there are 1 or 2 prominent people, and so on. They're scattered around the country. Prominent Sanskrit scholars, it doesn't take a whole lot to just put them on the payroll. And then they start parroting what the other side is saying. And this way, the people who ought to be actually giving a response are actually join the other side. Now, the Indian left, this is an interesting point. The Indian left has received most of its theories and doctrines from the West. So when you want to know why is it relevant, all this is relevant because a whole lot of Indian left that you study in social sciences, Marxism, postmodernism, all of that, it is not Indian-born theories. There's no Marxism out of India. There's no Indian left out of India. There is, postmodernism theory, critical theory, literary theory. These are fancy new things that keep coming out, feminist theory. These are all from the West, and they've been franchised and distributed into India. And the Indian left is very eager to show off who knows more about this Western theorist or that Western theorist. It's a deep inferiority complex to some extent. To some extent, it's a dismissal of our own resources. Of course, we have problems. We have a lot of problems, but we also have resources to solve those problems. And similar problems also exist in other civilizations. We have problems of, bias and whatever you want to say, gender and economic, social economic. But so also in the town I live, Princeton. I live in Princeton, which is one of the most elite, highly educated, high socio-demographic towns in the United States. And yet there is a very large Guatemalan immigrant community. They're from Guatemala, south of Mexico. They do a lot of the labor work. A lot of the labor work is done by them. And they're clustered in one huge part of town. A very large percentage of the town are Guatemalan immigrants. Many of them are illegal immigrants, some are legal immigrants. They speak Spanish, they are the underclass. So you'll find this underclass everywhere. Either it's blacks, or it's Hispanics, or it's Mexicans, or something like that. So you have social problems everywhere. That it's not an excuse for us. We have to solve our problems. They have to solve their problems. But to dismiss the whole civilization because somebody can find something in Manusmriti or somewhere else is not an acceptable thing from my point of view. The study of India, I want to give you a little historical perspective. The study of India, as far as we can tell, as we know it today, Indology, started in the late 1700s when Sir William Jones, who was a judge appointed by the East India Company in Calcutta, he became a lover of Sanskrit. And here is on the cover of this book is a statue in Oxford, in the wall of a chapel, where it says Sir William Jones and the Pandits. So Sir William Jones is sitting on a table, writing and giving dictation to the Pandits sitting on the floor. And Sir William Jones said, it is said of him in the caption, he gave the Hindus their laws. So it's like he's making the Hindu laws and sitting and taking dictation. Now, actually, he was the one sitting at the feet of Hindu Pandits learning Sanskrit. But in England, it's like he made these laws and taught them. And he distorted. He took a lot of smritis from various places, got things translated, and came up with what worked. The reason they did all this is British wanted to show that the rulings in India, the judgments they're making in India, are as per Hindu laws. So whatever they were deciding, they could say, we are applying Hindu law. What can we do, sir? We are applying your law. So this way, it's a good excuse also to do whatever one has to do and sort of blame it on Hindu culture. He started this field. He's one of the earliest Orientalists. They're called Orientalists because they manufactured, constructed, stereotyped the idea, a fantasized idea of the Orient, which is Middle East, South Asia, East Asia, different parts of the Orient. It is all sort of imagined by them. Lot of truth, lot of falsity, lot of praise, lot of romance, very exotic, but at the end of the day, inferior to the West. That's the bottom line. So this European Orientalism started, and after World War II, there was a period when there was confusion because the Europeans lost their colonies, and so they couldn't no longer continue this Orientalism studies. And then around 40 years ago, 45 years ago, a man named Edward Said, who's from the Middle East, an Arab, he wrote a book called Orientalism to expose the racism in the whole field of Orientalism. He exposed that. And so the whole field of Orientalists, including Indologists and so on, were in disarray, were in confusion, were kind of upset because they were considered racist. They didn't know whether to continue, leave, resign. It was in confusion. So then came this man, Sheldon Pollock, who is a major subject in my book. Very, very, probably the most powerful Sanskrit studies scholar in the West. Probably the most powerful Indologist in the West in terms of his influence and how much funding he gets and how he propagates his ideas. And with respect to him, because he's a hardworking, serious scholar, I have done my critique of him. So he came up with this theory which said that blaming the Orientalists for racism is not accurate because the real blame should go to Sanskrit. Because he says Sanskrit contained all these structures of bias and prejudice, and the Europeans came, studied Sanskrit, and got these ideas. So the Europeans got ideas from the Sanskrit studies, because Sanskrit studies had ideas on how you exclude Shudras, how you exclude women, how you hate others, the idea of, people that you don't like, this hatred, all this kind of prejudice, it was built into the Sanskrit texts. Europeans came, they learned all this, and then they started using these ideas, adopted these ideas. So we can't really blame them because they got these ideas from Sanskrit. So if you really want to know the origin of the European Orientalism, it lies in something called Sanskrit Orientalism. And then he goes on to say that the Nazis, Holocaust of the Jews, was also because the Nazis were studying Sanskrit, and they were getting some of these horrible ideas from the study of Sanskrit. Now, of course, traditionalists won't buy that, because a response is that Europeans had plenty of centuries and centuries of racism. I mean, they had genocided the Native Americans, enslaved the Africans, done all kinds of hatred and wars since Roman times, Greek times, biblical times. You see all that. So how can it be that they didn't know all these things? How can it be that when they came to India, they learned all these things in India, as if they were so clean and naive and pure that they hadn't learned? So if you were to look up a paper called Deep Orientalism, if you search under Deep Orientalism, it's a PDF downloadable, you will see this argument given by them that the deep Orientalism is in Sanskrit. The European Orientalism is influenced by the study of Sanskrit. These are some examples of the problem as I see. So I want to introduce an idea that I've mentioned in this book. I want to mention a couple of ideas. One is that in the Vedic times, the people who dismissed spirituality and sacredness and dismissed the Vedas were called Charvaks. They were called Charvaks. So they would be like atheists, like secularists. So I feel, and I have a section called Return of the Charvaks in this book, where I'm saying that it is the Charvaks who've come back. So we are not to disrespect them. We are used to this. We are used to this kind of debate. We have had it before. And so we can just think of these as modern Charvaks, modern and postmodern Charvaks. Now, they are more dangerous today than the earlier Charvaks because the earlier Charvaks were not globally powerful. They were not that rich. But today's new Charvaks are very rich, well-funded. They control the literary festivals. They control the journals like Ram was mentioning. They control the academic study of our civilization. So they've somehow taken control. They're in the dominant position. I have no problem if they should have a voice, but it should be equal. The insiders and outsiders should be equal. Charvaks are the outsiders of the tradition. And now the Westerners, as the leading Charvaks, also have their own agenda. So this is a very interesting kind of Charvaks. And unlike the previous Charvaks, who did not have any science and technology results to show, today's Charvaks can rightfully say that the Western science and technology has produced amazing results for 500 years. Airplanes don't require spirituality to run. And the mobile phone and computer and internet do not depend on the concept of bhakti or deity or Bhagwan, or no spiritual concepts are needed. These are secular accomplishments. And that is true. Science has come a long way in a purely secular mode. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But today, there is research on consciousness, which takes the sacred dimension, the spiritual dimension, the practices of Hindus and Buddhists, and studies these as cognitive science, neuroscience, in a very systematic, analytical, empirical way, very scientific way. And major breakthroughs are coming in the understanding of the human mind, the human being, and so forth. And so we are finding a scientific understanding of the sacred dimension, the scientific understanding of spirituality. Certainly a lot of Hindu and Buddhist meditators are at the cutting edge of this kind of empirical research. So this is an unusual situation where the modernity and the ancient Indian civilization have a confluence. And so the Charvaks today are not acknowledging the Indian contributions in these fields. So what is happening is, on the one hand, my civilization, my culture, my heritage is being demeaned and bad-mouthed and blamed for all kinds of negative things in society. On the other hand, the very same people are sucking out the knowledge and calling it their own, sort of like taking pi and attributing it to somebody, or taking infinite series and attributing it to somebody, which is what Ram was telling you about. That same thing is now happening in consciousness studies. Consciousness studies is the cutting edge of taking Hindu, Buddhist ideas, both practices and theories, and remodeling them in a Western manner. And then once it is remodeled in a neutral manner, then there is other people who Christianize it. So one of the largest movements of yoga is called Christian yoga. And Christian yoga says this is Christ chakra, this Christ chakra. And Surya Namaskar is translated as sun salutation, not S-U-N, which would be sun, but S-O-N, Son of God. So salutation to the Son of God, this Jesus. So this whole kind of manipulation of terminology, historical claims, etc., are going on. So whether it is digesting our civilization into Judeo-Christianity, which is going on, whether it is digesting it into secular science, neuroscience, and things of that sort, which is also going on, our shastras and practices are rapidly being digested into other cultures and civilizations frameworks. So people who do Indology, Sanskrit studies, South Asian studies, are silent on the positive contributions of Ayurveda, the origins of meditation and yoga, Mathematics, they are totally silent on that. On vegetarianism and respect for the ecosystem and environment. On the resources for the feminine as divine. I mean, the resources that we have, which are positive, are not being attributed to us. They are gradually being appreciated and repackaged as somebody else's. This is a huge industry to take knowledge from India and repackage it, reformulate it as knowledge that originated in a Western country. So new Westerners are coming up. So for instance, lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is Yoga Nidra. It is pioneered by Stephen LaBerge of Stanford. And he's going around teaching lucid dreaming. It's become a very big field. But when you talk to him privately, he'll say, yes, I learned it by such and such guru and such place, and it is Yoga Nidra. And Vipassana has become mindfulness. Vipassana has become mindfulness. One of the books I'm writing, actually it's finished, I have to publish it, it's called The Mindfulness Industry. The industrialization of Buddhism going on in the West very rapidly. There are people who come up with all kind of jargon, which is removing the idea of karma and reincarnation from Buddhism, because these can't be fit into Judeo-Christianity. What can't fit is being removed. What the science needs is being taken. So this tendency is going on, and it's our people who are not vigilant, and we're not sort of resisting that, we're just letting it happen. Now, some people ask me if this is un-American, anti-American, and so on. I lived there for 45 years. I understand the country, I love the country, and I know a lot about the US and how it works. United States is basically a project of foreign immigrants who negotiate their identity within the American umbrella. So we have Irish Americans, we have Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jewish Americans, Chinese Americans, and Indian Americans. Every group's history, if you look at the history of America, it's a history of immigration and identity formation. Every group goes through the stage of first establishing itself, then negotiating who they are collectively, that we are this, and we don't agree with the way the textbooks are written about us. Blacks had to fight to get rid of all kind of racial prejudices. Women had to fight from the 60s onwards to get rid of all kind of male-oriented references to them. So every group, this is part of the American way. To become fully American, you take your collective identity and you debate, you negotiate, you argue, and you want a respectful place for yourself within the American system. There is absolutely nothing American for having a positive Indian identity, a Hindu identity, and a Buddhist identity. In fact, to do so is what makes you properly an American. So those Indians who are very afraid, ke mat bolo, kya ho jayega, really don't understand America at all. And this is strange. In India, you can't assert positively your Hindu identity without being called communal. But in the United States, I can do that. It is not called communal. In fact, in Canada, they actually give grants, government gives grants to build Hindu temples. Every minority. Every major temple that hosts me in Canada, I tell them, wow, what an amazing temple. They say, we got $5 million from the government to do this, or we got so many $1 million, and that is true. You go and say, this is part of multiculturalism, pluralism, we are an ethnic group, we need this, and the Canadian government give you. Now, US government, they won't give you that. But you certainly have religious freedom rights in the US. And people are very assertive of their identity. And in fact, there are these historical societies that give funding also. If you want to write the history of certain immigrant group, you can get that. So US is not a place where, a person has to be very scared or very worried and all that stuff. The point is they will talk back, and then I also talk back. So I feel that somehow people in India are the ones who are very scared. And one or two of my future books, because they're very provocative, I'll probably have to publish them in USA first. I will. I'll probably have to publish my books in USA first, and then once they are okay, once they're bestsellers, then the Indian will also want to do print right, because it'll be okay then, So you have to, this is a very strange thing that we are not able to talk very openly. Now, quick list of some of the major differences, and then I will stop. The people I critique in this battle for Sanskrit are very much against the sacredness dimension. The sacredness of Sanskrit, the sacredness of Vedas, the sacredness of Ramayana, the sacredness bothers them because they're atheists. So they take out the sacredness. And to take out the sacredness, the argument is given based on an Italian of the 17th century, a scholar named Vico, V-I-C-O. No Indian traditionalist heard of him. So how is a traditionalist supposed to respond when he doesn't know what they're talking about? So our traditionalist is kind of ignorant and alien and an outsider in the academic discipline about his own tradition, because they're using references to people that the traditionalist doesn't know, and he's not required to know. Similarly, this whole idea of why Sanskrit spread, what is the mechanism by which Sanskrit spread, is a theory called the aestheticization of power. And this theory came from a man named Benjamin in the Frankfurt School of Marxism. He developed some theory to explain Nazism, and then Indologists started taking that theory, adapting it to explain the rise of Sanskrit all over the coast. Now, how would our people be able to even understand, much less respond? That's why they're asking me to explain to them. And in this book, I'm taking complex ideas and making them very simple so a mainstream regular reader can understand. That's my goal in this book, to make it really easy to understand. So one thing after another, I'm trying to explain where the vocabulary of the Western Indologists is something our people don't know what it is. Then, besides removing the sacred, they've imposed that the whole agenda for Sanskrit texts, Ramayana, all these things, was a political motive of the elite. The Indian elite, the king and the Brahmins were in collusion to kind of, give them power over other people, and that was the main motive, not sacredness. To us, the real purpose of the text is sacred. But to the Indologists, the real purpose of the text is political oppression. So the whole social oppression, caste oppression, oppression of genders, this and the political dimension become the lens through which the texts are being studied. So it's a Marxist, leftist interpretation of what our texts are all about. Then there is this claim that Sanskrit died 1,000 years ago because Hindu kings killed it. And some Muslims tried to save it, but didn't work because Hindus didn't cooperate. This kind of a statement. And Ramayana, the history of Ramayana, is that Ram and Ramayana were not mainstream popular. They were not very, very big in the mainstream until the Turks invaded 1,000 years ago, and then the Hindu kings needed something to rabble-rouse, get the Hindus on their side against those invaders. And Ramayana was a very good story which could be used to show that we are the divine king being Ram, and they are the demonic other, being the Rakshasas, the Ravana. So this idea of blaming the foreigner, blaming the other, blaming that kind of outsider is what Ramayana provides as a story. And so the claim is made that Ramayana's popularity has to do with these things. And therefore, that latent possibility in Ramayana always can be invoked and aroused, and that is what the Hindus are doing now in Ayodhya and Babri Masjid. This is the theory. So the theorizing and the interpretation of modern political conflict is being done by blaming Ramayana as having this kind of a narrative built into it and used often for the last 1,000 years. So this sort of interpretation ought to trouble our people. And I won't try to summarize 500 pages of books of what I've written here. I've worked very hard. I'll just conclude by telling you why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I heard that the Sringeri Peetham, from where Ram got a great award, and I'm very happy that Shankaracharya gave him that award, that the Sringeri Peetham's foreign representation was going to be outsourced to the very same people I'm criticizing. So the Charvaks 2.0, the Nastikas, the ones who are anti-Sanskrit, the sacredness in general. I shouldn't call them Nastikas because it's broader. They are actually atheists against all dharmic traditions. So the final authority in appointing the staff, the curriculum, the chairs would be in the hands of those people. and NRIs, rich NRIs were going to fund millions of dollars, and Sringeri was blessing it with, giving their name, and this would be like the official Adi Shankara chair of religion and philosophy. And I was very upset. And I offered to give them my analysis. It wasn't welcome. I was seen as interfering. Who are you? That kind of thing. Again, who are you? These guys are big. They're famous. They have all these credentials. Who are you? So I decided after none of that worked, I decided I'll go to Shankaracharya in Sringeri. So I went and visited Shankaracharya about a year ago and met him. And it's not my right to tell him what to do. I'm just a humble guy doing my seva by providing him information. And he heard me. We had a very long conversation. And he heard me very carefully. And he seemed to be in sympathy. And a couple of times he said, yes, these Western people, the foreign people who are interpreting all this stuff don't know what they're talking about. They don't really understand it. And I said, at least please wait for my report to come out. And when it comes out, you can decide however you want. So I didn't get a yes or a no because I'm not privy to whatever they're deciding. But I can tell you one thing. 18 months ago, when I heard about this academic chair for Adi Shankara in Ivy Leagues in the US, I was told that in 4 to 6 weeks, they were going to sign it. It had been blessed. It had been agreed upon. Only signature was a formality, and it would be a very, very big public announcement. That would have happened like 16, 17 months ago. It hasn't happened now, so I'm hoping it won't happen, but I don't know for sure. The first battle of Sanskrit that I fought recently is just getting this book out, because when I started announcing what the book is about at the World Sanskrit Congress in Bangkok, there was a huge protest, all kind of attempts to make allegations about me, attack me, and try to convince the publishers not to let this book come out and to ban all my books. And this came from the same people who proclaim to be the champions of free speech and intellectual freedom, and who are very concerned about intolerance. But I'm happy to tell you that their petition against me got 250 signatures, of course, by important Indologists and their Indian, left-wing supporters and so on. And I'm happy to tell you that some of you here in the audience and in other places put up a counter petition to support me, and we got 11,000 signatures. So we won the first battle for Sanskrit. That is the first battle for Sanskrit. And then, without mentioning names of specific institutions, during this tour, suffice it to say, certain well-reputed institutions that invited me had certain professors in the humanities who didn't want me to speak. And so it was very difficult on the part of the sponsors to fight and get hall booked and allow somebody like me to speak. One reason after another, one technical reason after another. And therefore, the mere fact that this is my 15th talk, and I have 7 more to go, and all of them in major institutions, also shows that we are gradually winning the battle. So I just want to conclude by saying, I invite debate. I may be wrong. I just like our people to be heard. I like an even playing field. I like both sides to talk in an amicable, mutually respectable way. And that's all I seek, is insiders and outsiders being able to talk. Unfortunately, in the West, in the West, right-wing, left-wing talk. They have debates, they have arguments. They don't have a Chinese coming and mediating. But in India, they all go running to somebody else to come and mediate between them, which is like the British used to mediate between one Raja and another Raja. It is a very dangerous thing. We must learn to talk to each other directly as Indians, even though we disagree with each other. And we don't need to go and get somebody else's adhikar or get somebody else's support. We don't need to get foreign funding and authority for us to be able to get along with each other, even though ideologically we may disagree, because debating and argumentation is part of our tradition, and that's okay. Thank you very much.
Rajiv sir, thank you for your research and thank you for coming here and sharing it with all of us.
Loved your speech today and gave me a lot of insights. I want to understand how relevant in this social age, in the social media age, in the digital age, in the age where the millennials are all over on the internet and they really don't have a connect to the Sanskriti and the Sanskrit language. How do we take this message to them, and how do they really understand and value this? Because the internet and the mobile technology has overtaken
Okay, so yeah, we'll have to go through quickly.
Yeah, sure.
So,
I hope you get the message, and I just want to understand the relevancy.
I understand I think
Thank
I
you,
have to
sir.
follow.
Thank you.
So I don't see the internet and the mobile as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. I see that the mobile can also be a way of distributing our knowledge, our ideas, and so you can distribute education through this internet technology. You can have distance learning. You can mobilize opinions. So I would say that we shouldn't think of modern technology as a anti-Sanskriti. In fact, it is a new way of distributing knowledge. So I don't think there's a problem at all posed by the new technology. It's actually an opportunity. I love the social media because otherwise the mainstream media would throttle us, block us, never give us a chance. And so it's the social media that gives us an opportunity to get a message out.
I really appreciate your idea of bringing this Purva Paksha back. I just want to ask, I think we already have a lot of that in our media. For example, one day if we see that Diwali is being celebrated.
No, can you move it away?
Right. If we see there's a news article about Diwali being celebrated, just side by side we have criticism saying don't burst crackers, it's bad for the environment. But on the other hand, in the Western media, when it's Christmas season, the entire country pretends and believes that Santa Claus really exists. So how can we as a community portray that unity in whatever we believe in? Do you have any?
Yeah, so this is more at a popular culture level. It's not at an Indology academic kind of level, which is where my focus is. I'm focusing on Purva Paksha at the level where the interpretation starts. So at the academic level, the relevant thing would be where they interpret Diwali as myth, but Christianity's stories as history. That is where the Purva Paksha has to be. Why is it that Indian sacred stories are considered myth? Even by your own town, famous Devdutt Patnaik, they are considered myth, whereas Judeo-Christian Islamic stories are considered history. So that is, once you've settled that, then of course how you treat Diwali and how you treat Christmas will have to be on parity. Right now, one is sort of myth. It doesn't have the same status.
Good evening, sir. My name is Manshu Agarwal. So the thing is here that we are talking about many things like we are not respecting our thing and we want other certification that okay, this was true. So first thing is that why do we need other certification? If we had some idea, we are the 1/6 population of the world.
Okay, so I understand. Straight question. Why do we need others' legitimacy if we are 1/6 of the population? Say it like that, done, and I can answer it. You don't have to go elaborate. I can understand very quickly. We don't have to have other people's validation if we don't have inferiority complex. Right now we have inferiority complex. So even if we are 90% of the population, the point is 1% can rule, they can control. I cannot get my message into mainstream media. So it has nothing to do with whether we are 1/6 or not. The point is mainstream media will not let me speak. They will criticize me, not even take my rebuttal. So the institutional bottlenecks, the institution through the channels through which knowledge is communicated, through media, through education, through higher universities, those gatekeepers don't have to be numerically very big. One chowkidar can close the gate. It doesn't matter whether he's 1/6 or 1/1,000,000th. The point is one chowkidar can control the gate and say you get in and you don't get in. That control of knowledge, bottlenecks and knowledge flow is in the hands of certain people with certain ideologies. It has nothing to do with their numerical strength. Okay.
So one more thing I want to point out.
No, you don't point out anything. Just ask a question.
Yeah. So
Ask me a question quickly.
So if we are like you have gave a lecture here, so isn't it a good idea to make it at a primary level or school level? Like that is a place where we are studying, we are making the people for the future. So if these kind of things are taught there,
So yes, of course, it should be introduced into the education system. We all agree with that, but it hasn't happened. It just hasn't happened. We agree that it would be great if media would be changed, if every media would allow both sides of the story and not everybody shouting at each other. But if they would bring one person and give them an hour and really let them thrash it out, I think the people would be better informed than bringing 10 people all shouting at each other. And similarly with education system, I think if there is a controversy, then they should represent both sides and say this is one view, this is another view. But right now this is not the case. Until Majumdar writing he wrote the history of India, multiple volumes. That was after independence, the history as we learnt, and that was very good history from our point of view. And then came the age of Irfan Habib and Romila Thapar and a few such people, and they got rid of that and brought in a whole left-wing, subaltern studies, Marxist kind of view of history. So a few people, not numerically how many people there are, a few handful of people took control of the intellectual apparatus and changed the whole thing, and we are living with it for 50 years. Next, please.
This whole debate about whom to give the credit for a certain method or whatever knowledge, that can be solved only if we have some hardcore evidence. But that can only be true if we build a time machine and go back. So how are you going to fight for it if you don't have that hardcore evidence?
So evidence sometimes there is a Delhi iron pillar. It has steel. You can study its properties. You can study what kind of temperature was needed to manufacture that metallurgy, and you can date it. So we have the evidence. We have evidence of many kinds, which is there. So evidence, I have written, my foundation published 10 volumes on the history of Indian science and technology based on hard evidence, no myth or narrative or hearsay. And so the point is that hard evidence-based Indian history of science and technology is available, and a lot of it is not popularized and not studied. So it is not lack of evidence. I'm not talking about Pushpak Viman. I'm not talking about nuclear bombs in the Mahabharata, for which I haven't seen a radioactive crater. And for the Pushpak Viman, I have not seen a wheel or a wing, or I have not seen any part of it anywhere. So I am skeptical, frankly. I'm open-minded. I'm open to ideas, but I don't have clinching evidence. I'm talking about things where we have clinching evidence. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Srijan from Pune. My question is, this battle of Sanskrit, is it based on empiricism or interpretation?
Well, I don't understand. The battle for Sanskrit has got a lot of issues. One is dating the texts. They date them a certain way, and they don't have any empirical evidence. They just date them a certain way. Then their interpretation of Vedas, whether they are socially oppressive or not. So the interpretation, it's interpretation. The interpretation can be based on evidence or based on judgment or based on hearsay or whatever. But ultimately it boils down to interpretation, no matter how you do the interpretation. So evidence is also a form of interpretation. Next, please.
Sir, how do you correlate your current book, which is Battle for Sanskrit, with Breaking India and Indra's Net?
Okay, there's a relationship. Each can be studied as the first book, and then because I try to make this a standalone book, it doesn't reference, you don't need to have studied anything before. I try to make the issues very straightforward, simple, direct. If you read two of them, you'll say, aha, they'll make bigger sense. But if you've taken any one by itself, it is meant to be readable. So this is a battle of a very particular kind, an academic battle of Indology, so that we exert our adhikar. We don't wait for anyone to give it to us. So this particular battle is one kind of battle. The Breaking India is a battle on NGOs, foreign funding. It's not academic scholars. It's a different battle. So like that. Each one is a different part of the Kurukshetra.
Sir, isn't it a fact that for centuries we have excluded Shudras and untouchables from learning, and by doing so we have lost a lot of the insiders from our civilization to defend the Indian culture. So had we included these people centuries ago, today we would have had several more people to defend this insider view.
Yes, so we have had injustice, and we need to fix the injustice. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Other people have also had injustice, and they have their problems, we have our problems. It's not like everything of ours has to be rejected because of that. So we have problems, we have to deal with them. I also point out in this book that the dismissal of the Vedic traditions is exaggerated and overdone and too sweeping. It is over generalized. We've also had many Reformation movements from within. And you should also note that the exclusion of certain castes was exacerbated during the British time when they did a census for the first time ever and made everybody document their caste and put them in a hierarchy and then give them privileges and so on based on caste. And the Indian government adopted that. So adopting a caste group and giving privileges is a recipe for breaking up India, because you have, now I was in Ahmedabad yesterday, and they have Patels rallying for status, caste privilege, and Thakurs. So, everybody is, now there's no end to it. It's a certain thing that has gone out of control. You have to turn this into individual level need, whether a particular individual, his economic status and so on, whether he should be getting some special privileges. And those, regardless of caste, those who are below a certain line should get help. Those who are above a certain line should not get help. There are also Dalit billionaires, by the way. There is a list of Dalit billionaires. Dalits will themselves tell you, and there are also very poor Brahmins. So I think it should be the individual merit and individual need. Then you can break up the caste system and make it a true meritocracy. As long as you're stuck with identity politics, you're not going to do it.
Pranam, sir. Had not Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism, would things be different from India today?
Say it again.
Had not Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism, would not things be different today for India?
Well, Ambedkar rejected conversion to Christianity. Do you know that? He wrote a lot of papers, and he rejected conversion to Islam. He gave a lot of reasons for that. So if you want to accept Ambedkar, you should also accept those parts of it. So today, they pick one slice of Ambedkar, but not the whole theory. He was a nationalist. He was very patriotic. He wanted to be within the Dharma traditions, but moved from Vedas to Buddhism. That was his conversion within the Dharma traditions. He did not want to reject the Dharma tradition and become atheist, so he was not a secularist atheist, nor did he want to convert and join the Abrahamic traditions. So today's sudden adoption of Ambedkar also can be questioned as to just how genuine and sincere it is. So I think it's not Ambedkar, but the way he's been adopted that creates these problems.
नमस्ते सर. सर, आपने पूर्व पक्ष की बात की थी, तो आपने बोला कि हिंदुइज्म और बुद्धिज़्म में जैसे पहले डिबेट किया जाता था, लेकिन हम में से अब कैसे डिसाइड होगा कि किसका पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू सही है या किसका इंटरप्रिटेशन सही है? उनसे बात करने से पहले हमें ये भी तो डिसाइड करना पड़ेगा कि हम में से कौन सही है, हम में से कौन अथॉरिटी होल्ड करता है,
हम में से कौन
अथॉरिटी होल्ड करता है कि किसका इंटरप्रिटेशन सही होगा.
So there can be many insiders. Insider भी कई हो सकते हैं. You can be one insider, I can be another insider. As he said, Ramji said, there can be many interpretations we can publish. So point is कि जो traditional view है, किसी वैष्णव का व्यू होगा, किसी शैवाइट का होगा, कोई अद्वैत होगा, कोई विशिष्ट अद्वैत होगा, कोई द्वैत होगा, कोई तांत्रिक व्यू होगा. All those views are valid and they have to be able to sit and represent. आजकल point ये है कि जब विदेश में एकेडमिक जर्नल बनता है और कॉन्फ्रेंस होती है, उसमें जो तांत्रिक प्रैक्टिशनर है वो नहीं होता, उसके बारे में लिखा जाता है. जो एक्चुअल वेदांतिन है, हु इज़ अ रियल प्रैक्टिशनर, हु इज़ इन दैट संप्रदाय फॉर लॉन्ग टाइम, वो नहीं होता. उसके बारे में उसको इंटरव्यू करके जो जर्नलिस्ट हैं वो विज्ञानी, वो स्कॉलर बन के लिखते हैं पेपर. सो इट्स ऑलमोस्ट लाइक जर्नलिस्ट रिप्रेजेंटिंग यू इन द नेम ऑफ बीइंग स्कॉलर्स. They come and they get reports and they have tape recorders and all these things and they have great degrees, so they are considered authoritative. लेकिन जो original authentic voice है उसको अपनी equal footing में voice नहीं, उसको अधिकार नहीं मिलता. So problem is that if we have many kinds of people under the umbrella of Hinduism or under Vedas, they should all have voice to represent their own particular tradition. कोई भक्ति के बारे में लिखना चाहता है तो भक्ति वाले जो हैं वो they should be answering that. So I'm not saying that we need a centralized pope, where there is one institution saying that we speak for everybody. ऐसे नहीं होना चाहिए. We can have diversity and we are fine with it.
Hello, sir. I just want to take your opinion regarding the geopolitical as well as socio-political issues, concerns in today's world in the context of growing terrorism and separatism issue which is disintegrating our nation. And what would be the probable solution to negate this nexus?
Can you somebody repeat this for me again? What was can somebody explain? I did not understand.
I just want to know the geopolitical and socio-political concerns in today's world in the context of growing terrorism and separatism movements, which is disintegrating India, our nation.
Okay, so geopolitics and terrorism, and you read my book, Breaking India. You read my book, Breaking India, it's got all of this going on. So, Breaking India mein likha hai how the international forces are playing with the Indian forces and how this is both together breaking India. So that's the relationship of breaking India and so on.
My question is, many people are converting from Hinduism, so removing the caste system and everyone is equal in Hinduism could be one solution. What are your views about it? And what are your views about Akhand Bharat, means where Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Tibet would be part of one India, Bangladesh? And what are your views how Indo-logic as a study can be developed through government efforts, and how interest could be developed in children?
So many questions you've asked. I don't even know what you asked. So anyway, first one was what? Before the Akhand Bharat?
How caste system should be removed in Hinduism?
So I'll answer the first two, one or two questions. Okay. So I already said, I think that if they removed caste and made affirmative action quotas on individual merit, so if you fill out like the Aadhaar card and all that, they could also put a score of a person's needs. Poverty needs, economic needs, whatever kind of needs, on a certain point system, they could get how much is the need of this person on a certain scale. So those people who have more needs should get more preferences. And this way, within 1 or 2 generations, we could wipe out, because it would be those who are underprivileged will get more benefits. Yeah, it has nothing to do with parents. It has nothing to do with community and caste. It has to do with you as an individual. Because you may come from poor parents and make it rich. You may come from rich parents and be poor. It doesn't matter. It's your personal situation that you count. And then we'll get rid of the caste system if we were to do that. Secondly, the Akhand Bharat, I'm against that Akhand Bharat idea, because I think it's like eating a cancer. You'll be swallowing up a bunch of very difficult places, very radical places. Let me just finish. We should first unify ourselves. If we can't even unify ourselves, we have too many problems. We aren't even of single mind. We don't have a single grand narrative. We don't have single textbooks that we agree on. We have too many forces fighting. Bringing more problems does not solve the problem. You must first, before you expand, you must have strength. So if you have a unified country with better economic status and less fragmentation and internal social strife, political strife, once you've created a unified Bharat, you can talk about Akhand Bharat. Then we can talk about expanding.
So my question is that...
Okay, they've told me 2 more questions because there's a Sanskrit play afterwards. So this person and 1 more. Okay.
So my question to you is that if Sanskrit is practiced on a personalized level in a student's life, what role will it play, and how will it help the student to come back on their right path from the wrong path they are walking, on the disarray, which will lead them to nothing but only frustration?
So, it's a very important point. In the US, they're doing some studies on people who chant, people who've done meditation from a childhood, and seen the effects on their scores, their grades, their mental health, and so on and so forth. So, Sanskrit taught with the proper sanskars from childhood, we ought to investigate that. We ought to do the research to find out exactly what are the benefits for a child. But some studies have been done which show that there are these kind of benefits. The other thing is that Sanskrit can also teach you a lot of the Sanskrit texts have good morals, good ethics, good values, which we are losing. The family system, the joint family system, respect for nature, respect for animals, The West is learning things like how do you respect aging by looking at Indian texts. How do you respect aged people? Because the geriatrics are living very long, but they feel alienated, nobody respects them. The West is learning things like animal rights, vegetarianism, you know, rights, the right of a forest, the right of a river. These kind of things are being taught. And we have such resources in our tradition. We ought to, using Sanskrit and Sanskriti, we ought to understand these better ourselves.
Sir, my question is, actually we see, तो हमारे जो समाज में देखा जाए तो जितने भी संस्कार होते हैं शुरू से बचपन से लेके हमेशा संस्कृत में पढ़ाए जाते हैं, संस्कृत में हमारे संस्कार होते हैं। हमारे जितने भी बड़े बड़े संस्थाएं हैं भारत के अंदर, सभी के जो मुख्य वाक्य हैं वो संस्कृत में लिखे गए हैं। लेकिन फिर भी एक संस्कृत से एक दूरी हो गई है लोगों की। जब भी हम बात करते हैं, अगर हम किसी से बात करते हैं संस्कृत की, तो वो एक कम्युनलिज्म से की तरीके से देखा जाता है। आज के ज़माने में मेरा प्रश्न आपसे ये है कि लोगों को अगर जो एकदम दूर जा चुके हैं, अगर उनको वापस इस कल्चर में अपन कहते डिस्कशन होना चाहिए, बट लोग डिस्कस भी नहीं करना चाहते हैं, उनको अगर डिस्कशन में इन्वॉल्व करना चाहिए, तो आपकी तरफ से क्या सजेशन है कि उनको डिस्कशन में इन्वॉल्व हम कर सकें?
See, I am having many discussions with many opponents. You see my videos, I have discussions with Christian scholars, with all kind of people. But I want it in a civilized way. I mean, one thing I cannot tolerate is nonsense where a person is trying to make more drama, but they really have very little substance. उस तरह के शोर-वोर मचाने के लिए, I find India has more of that. The Indian, it is more like Gundaism and mafia type rather than intellectual, honest debate and discussion. Because I'm also prepared to be wrong. I'm prepared to say, okay, I'm wrong. I'm learning from you. And so Indian thinking. I feel that the thinking has to improve rather than following a bhed chal, following a bandwagon कि मैं इस जलूस के पीछे लगा हुआ हूँ और मैं खूब shout out करूँगा. This kind of a low IQ, low caliber kind of just shouting, screaming is become a Indian alternative to good intellectual discourse. This is the land of intellectual discourse, argumentation, debate. We ought to have young people who come and make very challenging, logical arguments. But they should have the demeanor, the style of a debater. And I feel that that is not there. That is my experience. So I think अंदर से कुछ character की भी बात है. It has to have to do with स्वभाव. And your, maybe my own, I mean, you may not like this, but my own experience has been people who meditate, people who do yoga and meditate are calmer people, generally little smarter people. They have a stillness of the mind. They can understand better. Their comprehension is better. They articulate more clearly. And it's a lot of fun to debate with them and argue with them. But so maybe this rise of meditation coming back to India will change the Indian mind and make it a clearer mind. That may happen.
So
last question.
This is the last question, and this is a very relevant question. That's what I think. What are your recommendations for the policy makers, recommendation and suggestions for the policy maker for making India Jagat Guru in Indic studies?
So my books are being read by policy makers. My books, I keep getting invited. But I'm not sure how much the implementation is. And I'm not part of any institutional mechanism that implements. I have no authority. I don't want to join any institution because it has its own internal politics and I'll get stuck in that. I want to be a free thinker. So I constantly, both in public and in private gatherings, I meet such people and discuss debate, and then I don't play any role. That is how it is. And I am disappointed at the rate and speed with which changes are being implemented by our institutions. We have a lot of things that need to be done. We don't have enough time. And so I'm a little concerned that are we fast enough or not? That is my concern. My priorities for change. My priorities for change are that first I would like a university, world-class university on Indology in India, and world-class journal, world-class conference. And from there, the scholarship by the insiders, by the traditional people has to be redone, and that will generate new history, that will generate new philosophy, new social theories. We want to talk about feminism, we write new smritis. We have a tradition of writing smritis, which means something you keep rewriting for every era. Manu Smriti was written for one era, we write new smritis for 21st century. So we write new smritis, new kinds of siddhant, which means theories, new kind of siddhant. So we have to develop new R&D using the framework of our culture to generate more 21st century ideas and knowledge. And from this kind of a place, this was the role of our matthas at one time. This was the temple was a center of learning, not just a ritual. It was a center of learning, center of karma yoga. You see? So it became a place where you just go, give some money and tell God, solve this problem. That is, it became a ritual. But it used to be a center of serious learning. So if we can revive the learning, the R&D mechanisms of our civilization in certain new kind of institutions that can be set up, then from there I think it will spread into the rest of society. Thank you very much. Namaskar.